Today we're going to be taking a look at the HD 4870. It came out in 2008 for $300 and was a high-end card that can run just about anything on the market. Now it goes for about $25 on eBay, but it got me thinking. If I overclock it as far as possible, can it still run games and can it be a valid choice for a low-end system?
The biggest problem with this card is its age. It came out 14 years ago and a lot has changed since then. Most relevantly are the updates to the DirectX graphics API by Microsoft. The newest is DirectX 12 Ultimate, but the 4870 only supports up to DirectX 10. Some games do still support that version, but most run on DirectX 11 or 12, meaning that the 4870 can't run a lot of modern games essentially because it's too old.
This is the HD 4870. I got mine in a $90 GPU lot with 32 graphics cards, meaning I only paid about $3 for it. Visually, the card is in great condition. There's no scratches, the bracket looks brand new, and the exterior is nearly dust-free. But just as a good measure, I'm still going to take it apart and replace the paste.
The Radeon 4000 series was in direct competition with Nvidia's 200 series, which launched in the exact same month. This was an interesting launch, and to quickly sum it up, Nvidia was faster, but AMD had better prices. Take these benchmarks for example. The 4870 and GTX 260 perform similarly, but the AMD card cost $150 less. If I was buying a card back then, I definitely would have gone with AMD.
Come on. Oh. Is the heatsink just loose inside of the shroud? Okay, well, it's not really dirty. There is a little bit of dust along these thermal pads, but it's not disgusting, which is a nice change of pace.
The 4870 was powered by the RV770XT processor variant built from the Terascale architecture, coming with a total of 956 million transistors from TSMC's 55nm process. This was a high-end card, and back in the day, that apparently meant having half a gig of GDDR5 memory with a 256-bit memory bus running at 900 MHz. It also had 800 shading units, 40 texture mapping units, 16 render output units, 10 compute units, and a core clock of 750 MHz. Not great by modern standards, but at least it's not Intel GMA.
Oh, and there's the fan. And here's the heatsink. It's not actually too dirty at all, luckily, but I'm still gonna clean it out.
However, our card is in stock. It's by HIS, a Hong Kong-based graphics card manufacturer that produces Radeon cards, and we have the 4870 quote-unquote turbo. It's essentially just factory overclocked, with the core and memory running at 30 and 100 MHz faster than stock speeds. Other than that, it's the exact same. Same TDP, same blower-style cooler, and the same slot size, but ours does have a cool-looking decal, so I'll take that as a win.
And that was some very crusty thermal paste. I finally got it off, and the rest of the card is just about cleaned up. I also cleaned the heatsink up. It's this nice copper and aluminum cooler, so let's stick it all back together now.
The card also has a TDP of 150 watts, collectively powered by two 6-pin connections. This was the same as the reference card, as it was on the turbo card, and I decided to leave it this way. Additionally, they also both have the same video out configuration, coming with 2 DVIs and 1 S-video.
Alright, and that's the card all back together. Let's see what it can do. Installation is pretty easy. You just kind of stick it in there and hope for the best. And you plug in the first sideways power connector. That's ever so convenient. Plug in the second one, and we're good to go. Now, overclocking this card was interesting. To start, I didn't use the typical MSI Afterburner because of its unambitious sliders that don't go very far. Instead, I ended up using the AMD GPU clock tool. So I was able to get the core stable at 820 MHz and the memory at 1050. Essentially, if I tried to do anything higher, the card would flatline. And I don't mean like restart the system and it works. I mean like the card would stop working for like an entire day. I've had this happen before, but the card seems to be in a working condition. So these are the settings I decided to run it with. Let's see what the 4870 can do.
Having previously worked with the 4850, the benchmarks went about as good as I expected and weren't far off from the aforementioned card. I first ran CSGO because it's popular, not too hard to run, and came out when people were still daily driving the 4870. I ran the game in 1080p with the low settings and it was flawless, getting about 90 to 110 FPS. There was no stuttering, frame tearing, or any imperfections really. Now, I know CSGO's performance is strongly tied to the CPU, and I am using an old i3, but most people nowadays aren't going to be pairing this graphics card with anything much stronger. That all went pretty well, so I tried stressing the system a bit more with some GTA 5. In 1080p with the low settings, got an average frame rate of 33 FPS. I then dropped the resolution down to 720p and the average frame rate rose to 38. What's interesting about this test is that it didn't seem to be limited by the 4870's processor. Its utilization never really went above 80%, but its VRAM was constantly maxed out. After all, it only has half a gig of memory, and that's not a lot to work with. But the temps stayed low, and I'd guess it was still playable, just not great. Next, I attempted to run some Valorant, which on paper should have gone a lot better. I threw the game in 1080p windowed with the low settings and it got an average frame rate of 30. I wrote down its performance as quote-unquote stuttery nonsense, and that pretty accurately sums it up. The GPU usage was nowhere near full, and its resources were not properly being taken advantage of. It demonstrates the card's age and lack of compatibility in modern applications, and the game wasn't really playable. And it wasn't just my card acting up. I also found other videos showcasing this problem, and it really hasn't aged well for anyone. After Valorant, I dialed back the intensity of games and hopped into some Insurgency. This one ran great, and in 1080p with the low settings maintained a frame rate of about 110 to 120. There was plenty of performance, and you could definitely increase the graphics settings further. Like CSGO, there were no major issues, and needless to say, the game ran great. Now, because the card does not support modern versions of DirectX, I was kind of forced to stick with some older titles. Next was Dishonored, and in 1080p with normal settings, it got an average frame rate of 51. The game came out 4 years after the 4870 did, and although the card wasn't really new at the time, it still was capable. So far, it seemed that anything you can run on the card runs well, meaning that if the game does support DirectX 10, it's likely old enough or easy enough to run on the 4870. Also released in 2012 was Borderlands 2. It's a great game, and if you haven't played it, you definitely should, and if you have a 4870, it'll run great. I played it in 1080p with the low settings, and after a few minutes of messing around, got an average frame rate of 58 FPS. The card was in its element, and when it is, it doesn't disappoint. There were no performance or graphical issues whatsoever, and it really demonstrates how capable the card was in its prime. Finally was Portal 2, which actually was the most unstable out of any game I tested. It crashed twice during the benchmarks, which I've never had happen with this game, but dialing back the overclocks will likely amend this. In 1080p with the high and medium settings got an average frame rate of 84 FPS, and aside from the aforementioned instability, the game ran flawlessly. I think the best way to sum up this card is if you can start it, you can run it. Obviously that's not true for everything, but this card released right at the tail end of DX10 being the newest version, and is one of the most capable single GPU graphics cards that only supports up to said DX level. Any game I was able to launch on the card performed well. I mean, except for GTA 5, but that one was still in a mostly playable condition. But I wouldn't recommend buying one. It's old, outdated, and for a similar price you can get a GT 730 that's about as powerful as the 4870, but actually supports DirectX 11 and 12. Simply put, the card is e-waste, has no practical application, and is a piece of history rather than an active participant. Even if it just supported basic DirectX 11, it might have a shot at being practical in some cases, but unfortunately it doesn't. But if for some godforsaken reason you actually want this as your primary card, just make sure you get the 1GB version. The only issue I really ran into with the card is the lack of VRAM in the GTA 5 tests, and I anticipate having more should combat this. And I wanted to test more games like Dirt Rally, PUBG, BeamNG Drive, and Fortnite, but those games all require at least DirectX 11, so I wasn't able to run them. Overall, 5 out of 10. The card's too old to run anything, and its best use is to sell it to collectors on eBay. Anyways, thank you for watching, and I hope you enjoyed the video. Consider leaving a like or subscribing because it genuinely helps me out. If you want to join the community, there's a link to the official JKnight Discord server in the description, alongside a few donation methods that directly support the channel. If you have any questions or related comments, then leave them below and I'll be sure to respond to it. That's about it. Have a great day. Bye.